Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm here with Bram from Baserow. Yes, today we have a very special treat for you. We're going to build a job site and we're going to show you how to build the front end in Toddle and use Baserow for the back end. So, Bram, welcome and thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Andreas. I'm really looking forward to to showing how you can use Baserow as a backend in Toddle.
So I think we are currently live streaming to both our YouTube channel, to X, and to your YouTube channel at the same time. So I think we're going to have a little bit of a mix of audience of people who know Baserow really well, but don't maybe know who Toddle is, and vice versa. So maybe you want to start giving a bit of an intro to what is Baserow, and yeah, what can you do with Baserow?
Sure, of course. Yeah, maybe I'll start with a short introduction about myself for those who don't know me. So I'm the co-founder and CEO at Baserow. My background is actually in software development. Within the company, I'm mainly responsible for like the product development and strategy. I actually started Baserow as a side project a couple of years ago. I worked on it in the weekends and in the evenings, and yeah, it has grown to a venture-backed startup and the company that it is today. For those who don't know Baserow yet, Baserow is an open source no-code data platform. It can be used by non-technical or less technical users to easily create like a no-code database and to create applications as well. With the no-code database, the interface looks a little bit like a spreadsheet, but you're actually building a relational database under the hood. That database is also what we're going to use as a backend when building the job board. Baserow is open source. It can be self-hosted, but we also have a SaaS option. It's API first, so you can easily connect it with your own tool, and it's very scalable if you want to add a lot of data to it.
So what sort of made you start this side project initially and eventually decided to be a company?
Well, mainly because I wanted to build like a fun side project. I think that was like the main reason. I like to write code and also like to write code in my spare time. So it was really like a hobby project. I learned about Airtable for the first time. I thought, oh, that's really cool. We need to have something like open source or self-hosted. So I just started working on it. And yeah, after a year, I couldn't spend that much time on it, but after a year, I launched the first version. And I saw a lot of traction happening. And that's the moment when I thought, hey, I should actually do something with it. So I did like part-time freelancing, spent more time on it, and actually started building like a company around it. So yeah, that's a little bit how it got started.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, so to anyone who's tuning in here from Base Row and don't know Toddle, my name's Andreas. I am the CEO and co-founder of Toddle. Toddle started as a side project I worked on for a long time and has now grown into a venture-backed startup. Yeah, so it's a little bit of the same story over again. Honestly, the motivation was somewhat similar, but also Toddle was also a lot about me building the tool that I always wished I had to build web apps. So yeah, it's great you've got both of the founders here. That's got to be a good stream, right? Should we maybe start showing a little bit of what the end product eventually is going to look something like? I'll go and show because we're actually going to build this off a template in Toddle, and I'll quickly go and show that. And then the idea is when we're done that, we're going to go to Baserow and see how we build out the whole schema and load up the data until we finally wire it all together, right? So I'm in Toddle. I'm going to go here and create a new application. And under my community templates, we have this one by Victor, one of our very fantastic users, who's built this job site template. So we're going to use that one. I'm just going to create a new project from that. And it's going to load over here. And I'm just going to zoom out a bit. And you can see it's this really nice designed job platform where you can like subscribe to job alerts. And then if you go further down, you have a list of current jobs that are available with a lot of information on them. And you have some search filters and etc. over here on the left, right? So we're going to use this as a template, then going to go build the backend out for what it needs and eventually wire it all up so it works, right? But let's then go to you, Bram, and you can, let's go and see. There we are. And maybe you want to share your screen and we can start building out the backend.
Yeah, perfect. It sounds like a good idea. I mean, the template is looking great. I know roughly what kind of schema we need to build. So yeah, let's hand it over to me if you can. Yeah,
I
show
think you
my
need to
screen.
share your screen, if I'm not mistaken. I think
It
it's
is
not.
already shared. It says here.
Is it? Oh, let me just. There we are.
Perfect. So it seems like everyone can see this. This is like an empty workspace in Baserow. So it doesn't have anything created here. There's no database created. This is just like an empty workspace, like it says here as well. I've created this one for the demo that we're going to give today. But I first want to explain a little bit about the interface of Baserow. On the left side, you have a couple of buttons here. We have like a notification system where if anything changes in Baserow, you could see what has changed there. As you can see, Andreas has accepted my invitation to join this workspace already. You can see all the members that are in this workspace. You can invite other people to it. There's different roles that you can choose, but we don't have to zoom in on that too much. There's direct support available. There's like an audit log where you can see everything that has happened. But the most important thing is that you can actually create a database. So in Baserow, there's many ways of creating a database. You can start from a template. We have about 100 plus, but in this case, we're not going to use any of these templates that we have here. We're going to start to create the database from scratch that matches the jobs template that Andreas showed us, so that we can use that, so that we can use Baserow as a backend for that. So from here, I just want to create something new.
Do you actually have a jobs template in there?
I'm pretty sure we have, but it might not. Job search. Okay, so this is if you want to find a job, but I think HR, jobs and interviews. So we have something, and I think this one is more meant for like internal collaboration instead of exposing it as a backend. But we have some related templates to it. It seems, yeah.
Maybe we can get the one we built in at some point, so people can start.
We'll definitely. I'll have to check with the Baserow specialists in the team if they're willing to move the template in, because they're responsible for that part. But I'm sure they will.
Yeah, we don't want to step on anyone's toes.
Exactly. All right. So from here, I'm going to create like a new database. And what you can do is you can start from scratch, but you can also import from Airtable if you want to. So if you already have like a database in Airtable, you can use this to import and get your data in. So I'm just going to call this one jobs backend. So it has automatically created a table for me. And I'm going to use that one as a base, because what do we want to do? We need to store the jobs in this table that we're actually going to show on the jobs page in toddle. So I'm just going to call this table jobs, and I'm going to call this one a title. So this is where we could store the name, the title of the job that we want to post. So this could be something like full stack engineer or something like that. And so in Baserow, you have different field types. And it looks a little bit like a spreadsheet, the interface, but it's actually a database that you're designing. And in a database, especially in a relational database, you have structured data. So from here, for each column, which we call fields, you would need to define what the field type is. So in this case, I've said, okay, this is a text field. So that means you can only add text data here. What do we need as well? We need to have like a description of the job. In this case, the field type is already like a long text, but I'm also going to enable rich text formatting. Maybe in the future, you would want to have a more detailed job description that's going to be on that jobs page. And this gives you like rich text capabilities. So this could be like a full stack engineer, and then you could add some content below it. We also want to know when was this job post being created. So I'm going to add a date field. I like ISO format a lot, so I'm just going to call this one created. And then from here, you can actually choose, like this only accepts like a date format. So from here, I could say, okay, this was created yesterday, for example. Some other fields that we could add to the table is like whether it's a full-time job, for example. In this case, I'm going to use like a Boolean field. I'm going to call this one full-time. And then you can just say yes or no, depending on if this specific job post is a remote job. And the same for remote, for example. I already said remote, but the other one was for full-time. So you can say, okay, this is a remote job and it's actually full-time. Maybe we want to show a salary indication as well. So I could put like a number here. I could call it salary. Yeah, because we're typically working with numbers in the thousands. We don't need to have any places or decimals after the comma. So I would say 1,000, or maybe like this job pays 5,000, for example. But maybe it's also useful to have like the currency in here as well. To define that, I'm going to add like a single select field. And a single select field basically has a predefined set of options. I could say this is a euro or USD as currency. So I could say salary currency, save that field.
And so what is the benefit here of using a single select rather than just using, for example, text?
So if you have like a single select field, you know that the values in the cell are only going to be those options. Like if you work with other people, and Baserow is really made to collaborate on data like in real time. So you would invite a bunch of people to this table and they would all collaborate on it. If it's text, they could also misspell something. So if you in total maybe have like an if statement, like hey, if currency is euro, then show a euro symbol, or if it's dollar. And if someone makes a typo, if it's plain text, then it could be rendered wrongly in total in this case. So here we know they can only choose euro or USD in this case. And maybe as final field, we want to do like another single select field, maybe like a type, right? So we could have, I'm just going to copy these in. You could do like development. Maybe like a product related role. We could do like a marketing related role, sales, and maybe community or something like that. Here you can nicely choose the colors of each single select field as well. So I'm just going to pick some random colors. This one, like this. And then you could choose that as well. Like this is a development job, or this is a product job, or something like that. And this is something, because it's structured data, you could later also easily filter on that, saying like, oh, I just want to show the jobs that are development related jobs, for example. So from here, there's a lot of capabilities. So there's the possibility of filtering your data. So this is all if you collaborate on the data in real time in Baserow. So you could say, oh, where the title contains engineer or something like that. You can sort the data. There's not much in there. I'm going to import some example data later on. But you could like sort on your data. You could say, okay, sort, give me alphabetically order of the rows that are in here. You could group it. With a group, it just gives you a slightly nicer overview. So yeah, if you have like a lot of data and you say group it by type, then it's going to show all the development types, then all the products, and then you can easily see how many rows are matching that type, for example. So there's a lot of.
That's really nice. This is also where it starts being different than a spreadsheet, right? In a spreadsheet, you have maybe 100 rows or 1,000 if it's a really big spreadsheet, and in a database, it's a different scale, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a spreadsheet can also be a bit messy in terms of data. Everyone can put whatever they want in each cell. And here with the database, you're forced to work in a structured way. And because you're forced to work in a structured way, you can also easily expose it via an API so that other tools could use that data, for example.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
There's also the capabilities of creating like additional views. So if you say, oh, I'm applying this filter where title needs to contain engineer, you could create another view. You could even call this one all engineering roles or something like that. You could create multiple views. This one doesn't have any filters applied, and then you can easily switch to it. So a lot of our users, they have hundreds of views that they can switch to, and then they can easily see exactly the data that they're looking for.
And so views here, just like predefined filters.
Basically, yeah. So everything that you would define here, like groups, sorts, filters, everything that you define there, that would be saved inside the view. And then you can switch to it. So you could say, only show me engineering roles sorted by salary range, for example. And that's something that you can save in that view. And then you can prepare a lot of these views so that you can easily access the data that you would need to see without having to reapply all the filters again. I see that we have like a question here. So I'm trying to open it. I think I was able to click on it, right?
Yeah.
Not sure if that's... perfect. So which database you use to keep those different types of values, if it's okay to reveal? Yeah, definitely. So I think you're asking about the database that we're using under the hood. It's basically just a PostgreSQL database that we use, right? So for every table that's created in Baserow, it actually creates a PostgreSQL table, as Postgres table, and this allows us to store to store it in a very specific format, and then we can use all the useful features like filters, indexing, and everything that Postgres brings us.
And so this is kind of just diving into the nerdiness. So does the Postgres table actually one-to-one look like what you're looking at here?
Actually, it does. So this would be like a character field or character column in Postgres, for example. This would be like a text column. This would be like a timestamp. This would be like a Boolean column as well. So that actually looks very similar. I think if you go to the more complex field types, like here with a single select, you would only see like a number, because it's actually a foreign key relationship to one of these select options that we have defined. Yeah. So it depends a little bit on which field type we're talking about, but you're definitely going to see something that's very similar to what we're seeing here.
Yeah, but that's also how you would do that in Postgres, right? If you did an enum or something like that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
Nice.
Cool. So
what do we do next for our job database?
Exactly. So what I want to show is maybe we want to store which company this job post is related to, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create like a new table, and I'm going to call it companies. And as you see here, when you create a new table, there's a lot of capabilities that you have, right? Whether you import from a CSV file, whether you synchronize with an actual Postgres table or synchronize with Jira issues, you can easily get your data into Baserow and even keep the data in sync automatically. But from here, I'm just going to start by creating like a new companies table. So this one has like, maybe we add like Baserow and toddle as two companies. Maybe here we want to store, okay, what's the location of this company? So even though Baserow is a remote first company, the company is incorporated in the Netherlands. So I'm just going to write Amsterdam here, and I think Copenhagen for toddle. So maybe we also want to store like a country, right? So this would be a perfect fit for a single select field so that we can easily filter on it later. I'm just going to add some example countries, like maybe Denmark, Netherlands, Germany, Belgium. Well, that's more for demo purposes. I'm going to call this countries. Let's choose Netherlands and Denmark here so that it adds up. And a powerful thing that we can do is make a relationship with another table. So in here, I would make a relationship with the jobs table, for example. And because I make this relationship, it also makes like a reversed relationship in the jobs table. So if I go back to jobs, I would see that this company's relationship has been created as well. So either from here or from the jobs table, we can link it to one of the other rows. So maybe Baserow has a full stack engineering role available. So now we've actually linked it to the company. And what we could even do is if we want to show the country in the jobs table of the related company, we could use like a lookup field for that. So if I choose like a lookup field, choose companies, choose country, for example, let's call this one country as well. And now it's kind of like loading, it's like joining in the data from the other table. Some other powerful capabilities in Baserow, because this is all data that we want to expose publicly, but maybe you also want to work on the applicants internally in Baserow. So if I create like a new applicants table, this is also something that we could link to the jobs table. So I could say link to another table, to the jobs table, but I don't want to make the reversed relationship because we don't accidentally want to expose that data later on. But it could be that Bram, for example, cool name. Maybe you want to keep track of the email address as well. We call this email. We could add some notes to it, maybe some internal notes as like a long text field. We would call this notes. Maybe the stage of the candidate as well. So we could do like a stage. Could add a couple of options again here. So maybe we could have like someone just applied, someone like an intro call has been scheduled with this candidate, an interview has scheduled, and maybe rejected or hired, for example. Let me get some of these colors right so that we don't have any conflicts there. So we could say, oh, Bram just applied. And now everyone can see who's collaborating on this data that, hey, there is an application in progress for this job, for example. So I could link this to the full stack engineering position. Maybe also store like a date when someone applied so that we can keep track of that. So maybe Bram applied on the 19th. And maybe we even want to have like upload a resume or like a CV of someone so that we can keep track of that and that it doesn't that it's not stored on anyone's computer locally. So I'm just gonna upload this CSV, and you can upload any file in this file field, right? So this is a PDF file and you can immediately preview this one, but you can also upload images, videos and everything, and you can immediately preview those in the Baserow table as well. So really cool thing is I could create like a Kanban view, for example. I could call this stage, and this Kanban view, we could group it by the actual stage of this table. And now we have a nice Kanban overview of all the candidates that have applied, for example. I could say, oh, Bram has been moved to an intro call scheduled. Maybe Bram was rejected or something like that. And this will automatically change that cell value here. And we have many more useful views like that, like calendar view that will show things, dates on a calendar or a timeline with the starting and ending date. You can even create a form. We could create like an applicant form, for example, where you could say, okay, let people fill out their full name, email, notes, or other notes. These are private, and the related job that they're applying for. This is something we can share publicly, and then if you could use this as an application form, for example. Let me see if there are any questions. No, I don't think so. I think I see here someone asking about the validation rules in the forms. So each field type has its own validation. So we have like email is automatic because it's an email field is automatically validated as an email. But you can also apply conditions to it. If you want to have more advanced forms where you say, oh, only let people upload their resume, for example, if the job is equal to the full stack engineer. Otherwise, it won't show that input. So if I preview this form, it's not going to show it. But if I choose like full stack engineer here, then it's going to ask you to upload your resume. So you can build quite complex multi-step forms this way.
Nice. That's very useful. Like you can do a lot just out of the box. So are we? I suppose if the jobs table is ready, should we load some data into it?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I've prepared some files that I can import. So if I have the field names correct, I should be able to import these companies first. So this is just an export with some random companies that I've created. I've imported them so that we have some data, and I will also import some additional jobs to it. So let's take the jobs and import those as well. Let me see if everything is matched to the right. This is companies. Okay, sure. I think it's going to be good this way. So I've imported some data. As you can see, like these names don't actually make sense, but it's this was randomly generated. So I think our next step is to actually expose this as an API so that Toddle could use it as like a backend. So what we can do is, what I first want to do is create like an API token. We can go to my user settings, database tokens. I would create a new one, toddle demo. I would use this toddle demo workspace. And by default, this API key has create, read, update, and delete permissions to everything, to all the databases and tables. I think we only need read access in the jobs table. And I should share that API key with you. I'll do
Or
that in
maybe
a second.
companies as well.
Okay, companies, sure. We can do read access there as well. It doesn't really matter as long as we don't do applicants, because that's something we want to keep private in this case. And I can click here and click on View API Docs. And this is like the auto-generated API documentation, as we like to call it. So from here, I could go to like the jobs table, and here we see concrete examples of the API endpoint that you can call, an example of how that should look like, and how your response in JSON format is going to look like. And this actually matches all the fields that we already have defined in the database schema. So this is a nice example if you just want to get started with using Baserow as a backend via our API. Does this make sense? What kind of information do you need from me, Andreas, to get started with that?
Yeah, I mean, initially we just need to be able to fetch all the jobs from the table, and then later we'll go into filtering, right?
Yeah,
So
I
you
think that
just
makes
send
sense.
me a URL for that.
I just sent the API URL to you. And let's
a
also,
token as well.
perfect, and the authentication
Okay.
token.
So now that we've seen how we can set that up in Baserow, and we've loaded a bunch of data in, we've got it all set up, and we've got our API and our API key, let's pop over to Toddle and see how we can fetch that data in and visualize it in a nice sort of user-friendly way, right? So I'm here in my job site template, and what I want to do now is I want to create a new API in Toddle, which I'll just do by clicking here. For anyone who's not so familiar with Toddle, it might make sense to do a quick run through. Essentially, as I mentioned, it's a tool for building web applications, specifically the front end. So when you're using Toddle, you're always pairing it with a backend like Baserow. We also work a lot with Sano, Supabase. Like there's a lot of different solutions that fits nicely into different use cases. So that's why Toddle kind of just works with everything. But you're always loading the data in, because Toddle's job is really to build a UI for your data and for your application, and present it in a nice way for your end users, right? So I'm going to go create API, and right here I can just paste the URL in, and Toddle will then pass that and understand the request and format that for us. In this case, we're getting an authentication credential were not provided, because we need to go back and grab that little API token you sent us right here. And I believe it said it was supposed to be a header.
Yes, it would be an authorization header where the value starts with, instead of, yeah, exactly, token, and exactly like that. Yes.
So we'll type that in. And because we have this little auto fetch check on, whenever something changes in the request, so whenever the request data gets stale, it's going to automatically refetch. So here we can see, okay, I'm getting a new, I'm fetching these results, and you can see, I can see all the items I have here, right? And I can see both my actual job, title, full stack engineer, description, created at full-time remote, salary. Then for salary currency, I have this little object. I think that you said that's how you show selects, right? And then type is the same. And for companies, we actually get to see a little bit of that company data as well. And the same here for country, right? So we have all the information loaded up that we need. It's already been fetched into our page. Now we just sort of need to use that to actually render our page. And because we started from a template, that's all. And you can, when you create a new project in Toddle, as I showed at the start, you can just select the jobs template, and then you'll get to the same place where I am, right? But so because we are using a template, we don't really need to design anything today, right? We have a lot of videos on how to do web design in Toddle. But today we're going to focus a lot on how we integrate it with Baserow, right? So I have this div element here that represents like one of these jobs, right? And we can see it's already from the template using a repeat. And what a repeat essentially says is, if I click on it, go and render this div, like all of this content inside this element, go and render that for every item in the list I provide you. And initially, it's just sort of have a list called repeat list. Again, this was built by the author of the template, but we actually want to do this based on the data coming back from our API, right? So we can go and change this to use we actually call that new API. Let's go and change that to jobs, because new API is a bit lazy, right? So we'll go back and change that. So we can actually use our jobs. And then we have a bunch of stuff here where we can see, is it currently loading? It's not. An error, we get a lot of response metadata, including like the status code, like headers, all sorts of things we can get. But what we care about here is the actual data being returned from that request. And then here we can pick the results. And that gives us a list of items, of a bunch of items right here, right?
And what
now
was
if we
that
close
is
this,
loading property that I saw, Andreas? Is that kind of like to indicate like this API request is currently being fetched or made, so that you can show like a loading spinner or something like that?
exactly. It shows that there's currently an ongoing request to the backend that's happening. And you can either use that like for the first loads to show, like instead of showing results, you show the spinner. But if you actually refetch that results later on, it doesn't remove the data, it just sets it to loading. So you can have you may have a scenario where you want to like show a little spinner while you're still showing the data, but refetching data, right? And you can build that logic up the best way that works for your scenario. So when we're now looking at this, we can't immediately see something changed, other than actually there's a lot more items that we had before, right? And that's because we told it to repeat, like go and render it for every single one of those items, but it's still rendering the same content inside it, right? Which is all the same stuff. So now we can sort of start to actually replace all the content inside this little card with the content we got from API. And because we're repeating, we can actually go here and say, we need to go and select the text. And then we can say add formula. And because we're repeating, we now have access to this repeat item. We couldn't see that before because we have to be inside one of these repeating blocks, right? And here we can get the item. And then we're basically just looking at all the data that was extracted from the database. Like this is one row from the database, because every time we repeat, we would do it for every row in the Baserow database, right? So I can pick title here, and then I'm going to get a new title for every single item, right? We can see that's missing one here. So we can actually fix that. In this case, we can say, oh, well, if there's missing one in this case, we can actually go say default to surprise job. right? Oh, actually, maybe in this case, the title was just an empty string. In that case, it's just going to show. Okay. So it looks like it wasn't null. It was just empty. Okay. So we have the title. We can go and do the same here. We have, like in this case, the company, I think is the idea here. So we can do the same. So we can either like right click in here and show formula. Over here on the right side, we also have this little control panel where we can either type in the text or we can use this formula button. It does the same thing. It's just two different ways of getting to this formula. And here I can again use my repeat item. So basically every time in toddle where you want to showcase, like where you want to use a dynamic value, like something that's going to change depending on the data and the state of your application, that's when you reach for formula, right? And sometimes we explain it as saying it's not what the value should be, it's where should you get the value that should be in this field, right? So in this case, I should get it from the repeat item and from companies and then value, right? That's where we access the data, right? And now we can see we get toddle interior, Baserow. In this case, we have this little full-time. We don't actually have a text in Baserow that says full-time, but we do have a column. So we can instead say, well, if this item full-time, right, full-time. Otherwise, I think we are going to write part-time. In this case, I think since it's a Boolean, we only really have the two options, right? Oh, now we're getting null up here. Well, that's okay. That's how this one will default to somewhere. Yeah, I think we have one row that wasn't filled out by the AI generation in this case. But so now we can see, we can read the full time. We can do the same here with our location. And I'm basically just going through all the data here, right? And saying, okay, when am I like, what data should I actually render here, right? In this case, I'm saying item, and then we set country, right? Netherlands. And here
Would
we're
it also
adding
be
in
possible when you do the country, like we also have a Boolean field that says whether it's remote or not? Could we put between brackets using your formula if it's remote, if that value is true?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm just going to hold down Option and copy this text because it's a little bit easier. And then I'm going to say, what is it? Item and then remote.
Yes.
And we'll do an if again here, right? If it's remote, then we'll say space remote like that. Otherwise, we'll just do an empty string and not add anything, right? So now every time it's remote, it's going to write that afterwards, right?
Cool.
And we can kind of do a little bit of the same trick here with our salary. We're going to go and select the text again and say salary. And then we'll just get another one here. And here we'll pick salary currency. Right, euro. So I think actually this little empty line here is very clear that it's not going to be very useful. So instead of trying to render it with default values, actually it's probably much better just to filter it out. So I can just go in here, take my results, and then say filter. We'll just make that bigger. In this case, I think we're going to say if the company, let's say ID, like only, or in this case, company 0 actually. So it basically says only show me values that has a company. If there's no company, just don't show it, right? And now it's going to filter out that value. We might find at some point that we want to do a more complex formula, but that sort of worked for now, right? So we can go and say, like, I want to show everything, except in this case, the data was like, there wasn't an entry there. So we'll just ignore it, right? And then the last thing we might do is grab our little time here, and we can do item created at that actually is fine. We'll just do this. Showcase the date, right? That one probably isn't, I think, by now, 1992. My guess
Because of
is
the
that,
randomly generated data.
yeah, I don't think that job is going to be the same anymore. I wouldn't apply for it. Yeah. So now we've kind of, maybe one thing we want to do is just get rid of this image here, because we don't really have any images of the jobs to show, so they don't really make too much sense. But so now we basically just fetched all of the jobs, and we can really easily just map all that data into our toddle application, right? So we can see what we're actually working with. Right. So what should we do next, Bram? What do you think is our next step here?
If we still have some time, maybe some filtering. Like I see like a types drop down here. Maybe we could show the types that are related to the job. Like what we created in the table was like development, product, those kind of role types. Could we apply some filtering there, that if you change that drop down, it will actually add a query parameter to the API request so that we can filter? Nice.
So in this case, I have like some options here that are predefined. I mean, we could go with part-time, full-time. That would kind of work, wouldn't it? Or should we go with the type of role?
I think that would make sense. Yeah, if we do the type of role, so development, and I have an endpoint for those options. I'm not sure if you could use that one, but there's an endpoint where you can extract them from, if that makes sense.
Yeah, let's try and do that. Okay, can you send me the endpoint?
Yes, I'm sending it to you right now. This is like the lists field, the list fields endpoint. So it's going to list all the fields that are in that table, and we could find the type field in there. And there we have a definition of the single select options that are in there.
Excellent. So I'll add a new API. We'll paste this in here. We'll call this one job types. And we need our header again.
Yes.
Authorization. And I'm just grabbing that one more time. I'm just grabbing the same token you sent me earlier here. And it should be token. And this token here is not like a secret API token. You set it up so I can literally only read for it. So it's perfectly fine that we put it in. Normally, you never put API tokens into toddle, at least if they're supposed to be secret, because toddle runs on the front end. Therefore, any user will be able to read any token you put in here, right? Any code that runs on the front end is not going to be secure from the user that's using it, right? It's okay if they're logged in and it's their personal authentication token, but any sort of general API token you never want to put into toddle, because that's not secure, right? That's why we have backends. That's why we use something like Baserow, for example, right? So now we're getting a list back. We can see with a bunch of items here.
Yeah, we want to find the type field in here where name equals type.
Oh, so this gives us, this gives us all of the,
all the fields.
Excellent.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if you scroll down a little bit further, I think it's like is that no? Yeah, that type. One, like type. And in there we have like
selected options.
Exactly.
Okay, perfect.
And so these are the options you want to render in that dropdown. And then the ID value matching it, that's the one that we're going to need to make the other API requests to actually filter on the jobs.
Okay, perfect. Okay. That should be fine. Then we go here and we grab our option. And the first one here just says option. And actually, in this case, it says all types. So it's a way to reset it. And I'm going to actually set that to nothing. Like or actually, we'll set it to null. Because that means that when I select that one, I don't want to filter by this property, right? But after that, I want to repeat this option for everything in the list. So I'm again going to say repeat. I get that from the right-click menu here. And then we get job types. And now we have to go and find. Actually, let's go and find which we had a lot of them. Which one was it? Actually, instead of trying to, maybe they won't come around in the same order next time. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to say find. we're going to find the one where the type is equal. Was it type, right?
The name was equal to type. Yeah.
Name is equal to type, like that.
Yeah, we could also filter on the ID if that makes sense, if you want to make it a bit more robust, because if the name changes in Baserow, but I think for now this is fine.
Okay, yeah. So then we get this one, and then here I can just, after I've done that, I can say get again to extract the selected, what is it, options? That was not quite right. What's it called? Select options. There we go. So now I'm back to getting this. So it became a little bit more of a complex formula, but you can really like build them as complex as you need them for whatever problem you're trying to solve, right? So here we're like specifically searching through a list to find just the right item for type here, and then we're extracting the selected options for that. So we have that list, right? And we're going to use that to repeat on this one. We already did that. I'm just going to get rid of the other ones. There we go. So all these old ones we're getting rid of, and now we're going to add in here in the text. That's the wrong select. Here we are. Here in the text, I'm now going to render that out. And I'm again using repeat item. It's the same process as when we rendered the list, right? And here I'm going to get my value out. And my option value here. So when you do a select in HTML, and toddle here is just like what we're doing now is just HTML, right? It's not a toddle specific system that we've invented. We are basically just rendering HTML into the browser like you always do when you're building websites. So everything pretty much works the same way. You just have a nice UI this time. So with select, you have an option item for each of these select options. And the text you put inside it is what you see. And the value here is what the actual value that's being stored. So in this case, we want them to be different because I think you said that we wanted the ID to be the thing you actually select. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing that we're going to need to match them properly later. Yeah.
Okay. So the last thing we need to do to make this work is that we now actually need because we can just check here, go to test mode. We can now see we get all these options in our select, right? So now we can go and check and wire that up. So we actually use it to filter our job titles. And to do this, we first want to keep like a local in our browser in local state representation of what is the selected type. And this is where variables are really useful because they are a way to store data temporarily inside the browser. It's not like the same as storing in a database, right? When you refresh the browser, you update, but the benefit is you can do it really quickly. And you can sort of, when you refresh, you start over, which is sometimes what you want to do, right? So in this case, we want to do a type filter. Let's call it that. And we started out with null, right? And then here on the select, I'm going to say, I'm going to add an event listener that says when this select changes, and again, all these, that looks really overwhelming. And to be honest, sometimes it can be, but these are all the possible events that you have in a browser, right? So these are all the events that can happen on an HTML element. You don't need all of them to build an app, but occasionally you do need some of the more complex one as you start building more complex things, right? So in this case, because this is a form element, we are going to use, form control, we're going to use this change event that emits, right? And in this case, when it does that, we want to set our type filter, and we set that to events, and that's the target of that event's value. And again, this is all the same. Like we very deliberately decided not to go and invent our own system here. We wanted to work the same way as it does if you're building this with like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It's the same names, the same basic steps you do, because that way anyone who has any sort of web development experience already knows how it works, right? And it also means you can take that experience onto whatever else you might do afterwards, right? So whenever we change this, it should update the value. Let's give that a shot. So if I say development, I should now see that I have an ID here on my type filter, right? And if I go and change it to like marketing, again, my type field updates to a different value. So now it has a variable. I can use it inside my API. So here in jobs, I now want to add a filter for this. How do I do that, Bram?
I just shared a link with you. So we need to add a query parameter.
Okay. And yes, and what we have them here.
Yes,
So
exactly.
we already have one that says user field names. I think that means add on the names you provide to the different user fields.
Instead of the IDs. Yeah, that's right.
Yes. And here we're adding another one. And what is that called?
It's filter __. And then field underscore, and then that ID that's in there, that's 2987522.
Oh, okay. So that's a dynamically generated based on that.
Yeah, you can also use the name of the field if you want. You can also just say field underscore type, or I think it's just type. So you could also add the query parameter that says filter __ type. Yeah, if you can add a new one, yeah, filter underscore and then type, but with a capital T because that's the name of the field.
Okay, but that changes for every. No, that's fine. Filter, yeah.
Yeah,
like that. You say.
And then __. Yeah, it's maybe best if you copy it from the private chat. It's single _select _equal.
Okay, and this is.
Yeah, this is what we need to add.
Okay, yeah,
exactly.
Yes. Okay, great. I've got that. So we put that in here.
Yes,
and
then
just do like that. And then the equal is the value we saved in the variable, right?
Exactly.
There we go.
And then maybe as the initial value should not be null, but maybe an empty string, because then it doesn't filter on anything. So the initial value of your type filter variable, I think it was null or something like that. I saw.
It is, but if we set it to null, it doesn't send it.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, because we have a lot of times when that's sort of when exactly you want to maybe set a filter, but maybe not set a filter. And backends can behave very different depending on whether you're sending null or an empty string. So in our case, if you want to send null, you have to send the string null, which is what you would be sending through a URL anyway. But if it's an actual null value, means empty, then we just don't send that query parameter.
Okay, so it's perfect. That'll work then.
So one of the nice things about toddle and this whole auto fetch is that it keeps track of everything that's going on. So because we're using a formula here and a variable inside that, whenever that formula changes, this request is going to say, well, I'm no longer relevant, so I need to start and refetch, right? So if we actually just let's go and try it in real life mode on our preview. Every time you're building in toddle, you're building on a branch, which we have a lot of explanation to. Don't want to dive into, but it's basically your own version of the app that you're working on. And they always have a live preview environment, so you can always share what you're working with anyone else, right? So in this case, if I go and say type and say product, it's going to immediately filter to those. And it should also work with all types. It doesn't because I'm typing in the string null, I think. Let's have a look and see if I'm actually doing that when I'm selecting all types.
It updated it for me. I saw at least.
Sorry?
Oh, it did look like it was updating something when you changed the drop-down value.
Oh, but I think we're doing something weird here. Let's just... yeah, I think it did, but not for the last one, because I think we just need to fix the first option value here. This one will just say none, and we'll just detect. We'll just do that in here and say, in this case, when we're querying, we'll do a little bit if type filter equals none. So what I'm basically doing here is I'm just eventing like a value none and saying if that's the one you're sending, you should treat it as an empty, right? Because if for a select element, I can't actually put a null value, and HTML doesn't support null. It doesn't understand that concept, so therefore that didn't work. But let's try now and see if we can still. I'll go over here. We'll refresh. So I'm saying product, that works. If I'm saying all types, I'm going back to see everything, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we are a little bit over time, but I do really want to show search because I think that's quite a cool feature. So maybe we quickly do that and then round it off. How does that sound?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so how do I do a search?
So with the API, you can add like a search query parameter, and you just provide like a value on whatever you want to search for, and it does a full text search on all the rows and cell data in the table automatically. So it would match the type name, the salary currency, the salary, the title name of the job. So if you would just add that, it does a global search in the table basically.
Okay, well, that was easy. So I'm actually going to do more or less the same thing I did with the select, but now for this search input. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called search. And I'm going to initiate that to an empty string. I think if I send an empty string a search, it just means everything. Is that correct?
The empty string just doesn't search. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's perfect. And so just like here, I did this whole event like on the change event, but actually with inputs, we have a shorthand. So you can just say bind to variable search. That means whenever I type into the input, the variable here, plumber, right? If I do that, then the variable search will automatically update. And actually, just the same way, if I change it in the variable, then the input value will automatically update. So the bind to variable is just a shorthand for essentially doing the same thing I did with the input, but it's a little bit easier. So now I have another variable and I can do the same thing I just did. I'm going to add a query parameter search. And in this case, we're setting that to our search. And now when I start typing React engineer, I'm going to get results from that. Now, one thing, this is like, again, Baserow can handle quite a lot of load. So it's not the biggest issue for small sites, but every time I type, I am updating that variable and triggering a new API request. So one thing I might do, just to be a little bit kind on the back end, is we can set a debounce of something like 200 milliseconds. And what that means is that if you hit two keys in and the time between you hit them is less than 200 milliseconds, it's not going to trigger an event for the first one. So if you're typing really fast, you have to take like a 200 millisecond break before you send it. In reality, it just means you send about half or maybe a third as many API requests, and you still get the same effect, but a little bit less server load. So in this case, if I see like developer, I'm still, hold on. Oh, it's because all of them saying developer or React. So I'm still getting it, but I'm actually have this little tiny developer. They're all developers. That's why we put them in types developer on all of it. That's why we're not seeing any difference here. But if we're saying like SAC, right? So we're still getting those. It feels like instant results, but we're actually skipping a few of the requests just to make sure we're not hammering a server. And one of the
we appreciate that as Baserow.
Yeah. You're welcome. I mean, you can handle it, but you know, it's still nicer on everything if we're not doing a lot of unnecessary work. And one of the things we actually built into Toddle, like the new version 2 of our API connector that we've been showing today, is that it guarantees that the order that the responses come back in is the same as the request being sent out. So what I mean by that is like when you're typing here, especially if I type like RE really quickly after each other, those two events are going to happen with a few milliseconds in between, and server latency, etc., might mean that there's a chance that if I send both of those requests off, even though the RE comes just after the one just for R, there's a chance that those requests is going to come back in the wrong order, because that's just part of the internet. When you're sending traffic over large distances, like one server might be doing something else, and one request might get slowed down a few milliseconds. The other one might be a little bit faster. So when you normally make a request, you can't have that guarantee. But in Toddle, we actually make sure that the API always returns them in the right order. So you don't have to think about that. Like, you know that the latest request you made is always the one you're seeing data for. It's a nice
that's really cool.
little addition. If you ever had to work with, have to deal with those kind of bugs, you know just how frustrating it can be.
Yeah, I've had similar bugs in the past, so it's a
Race
really cool
conditions are
solution.
never fun. Yeah, but we make sure to handle that for you entirely in Toddle, so you just never really have to think about it. So as I said, I think we are well into the slide over time, so maybe we should move on to rounding off. And should we have a look at some questions? I think one we had here is a question for the end. How would you, let's just show that one. How would you set up user authentication for a toddle/Baserow app? Exactly. Do user logs in and see jobs you have saved? Maybe, Bram, you want to address this one?
Yeah, of course. So currently, we were actually brainstorming about the topic of this of this live stream, and this also came up. And so we have recently implemented a password field in Baserow, and so the only thing that's currently missing is like an endpoint where you can validate if the username and a password is going to be correct. But that's a feature that is on our backlog. And what you can actually do in that case, you could actually create a Baserow table that's called users. You would create like an email field, a password field, and you would actually store all your users in a Baserow database. And then you can use a front end like Toddle to use that table and to use those users to actually authenticate with them. So currently, you would only have the ability to log into your actual Baserow account, but that doesn't provide that much value, I think, if you're building a front end with Toddle. But this is going to be possible, and it's going to be really, really powerful.
That sounds great. We're very much looking forward to that. When it's out, should we do another stream and show how it works?
I think that makes a lot of sense. Yes.
Excellent. Yeah. And then
I see some other questions coming in. Yeah.
How do you define users in your pricing? I'm not sure who that's for. But I'll start. In Toddle's case, the users we refer to in our pricing are developers building your Toddle application. We don't charge for end users at all. So it's only for people who are currently building. You can have. We don't care if you have 1 million or 1 trillion users. That's for you to deal with.
And in Baserow, you basically also pay for the users that are creating like a database. If you're on like the advanced or enterprise plan, you can invite a lot of users that would just look at the data, don't edit it, and those are free. But the people actually edit the data in Baserow, those are users you would pay for. But there is also a very generous free plan, and also open source if you want to self-host it. It's more if you want to have some additional features in Baserow, that's where you're going to need to pay for. So like the Scanman view that I showed, that's one of our premium features, for example.
So when you introduce the password field and have users inside that, you're not going to charge for the number of users in that table?
I don't think so, no. But that's something we would have to decide. But
Okay.
No, it's just an API endpoint we expose, and it's just data in your Baserow table. So no.
So Jacob here is asking. Nope. There we are. If I have 2 APIs and the first is really slow, will the other one have to wait for the first in Toddle so that the orders have been protected? So first of all, it's important to understand that this is when you set up one API, but you trigger it twice, right? If you have 2 separate API, they don't necessarily wait for each other, right? But if in case where you send off 2 requests almost at the same time, and the one that's technically last comes back before the other one, that'll just be shown, and it'll never, like, the other one will be thrown away. So the one that the previous request, if it comes in later, will just be ignored. Nice. I don't know if we had any more questions. I'm just checking in with Vakis if there was any questions asked on different. We have a admin. If we have any questions on some of the other channels that maybe we want to address.
There is one thing I want to show really quickly. If you can bring up my screen again that I shared. If anyone wants to use this jobs backend table, we recently launched a feature that allows you to export and import like structured data. So I'm going to export this table and I'm going to share the link to this download with all of you. So if you create a new workspace in Baserow, you can go to import data, upload that file, and then you would have a copy of these tables in this database. That was just something I quickly wanted to share.
Excellent. That's very cool. And where will you be sharing all this data? Where will people be able to find it?
Not sure yet. Something related to this live stream. We'll figure something out.
I can see that we're sharing all the templates in the show notes. I'm getting in for our admin. Yes, the stuff we build in Toddle as well, we'll also be sharing that. That's an open public project, so you can go and clone that. And we'll be sharing that as well in the show note. So you can go and sign up for Baserow, load the whole thing up with the template. All you need to do is essentially update the URL you're calling in the APIs, and then it'll work with the two templates. So yeah, thank you very much, Bram, for joining me and showing Baserow to all the Toddle people. I think we've been having a lot of questions to ask for what an easy to use database you can use with Toddle, and I think this is one of the easiest I've seen you can set up, and is still very, very powerful. So I think there's a lot of really cool use cases you can build here. And yeah, thank you to everyone who tuned in to watch this. And make sure you check out Baserow. If you're not familiar with Toddle, go check us out as well. And if you build something really cool, make sure you share it with us, because we really love to see what people are building.
Nice. Thank you so much for having me, Andreas. I've never used Toddle before, but it seems like a really powerful tool, especially the formula system that you have. Yeah, me as a developer, I feel right at home with all the concepts that I've seen. So yeah, amazing tool.